The old town had a quiet charm, the kind of place where history seemed to breathe through the walls and stones. Every street held stories from the past, but there was one place that carried the deepest weight: the soldier's tomb. It was not grand or decorated with gold, but it was respected. People came there on special days to leave flowers, flags, or even just stand silently with their heads bowed. It wasn't just a piece of stone, it was a reminder of a man who gave his life in service, a man who chose courage when it mattered the most. For many people in the town, the tomb was sacred ground. Children grew up learning to stay quiet when they walked past it. Old men told stories about the soldier who rested there, reminding the younger ones of bravery, sacrifice, and respect. The soldier had fallen long ago, but his memory still stood like a torch that refused to go out. Every year, on Remembrance Days, families would gather and light candles there, whispering prayers of gratitude. But not everyone saw it that way. To some, especially the entitled young ones who cared little for history, it was just a piece of stone. They didn't feel the weight of the past. They didn't understand the meaning behind the silence. To them, it was nothing more than an empty old place to mock and laugh at. It was a late evening when the group of boys arrived. The town's street lamps glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the cobbled road. The air was cool, the kind of night where most people stayed inside. The boys, however, were loud and careless. Their voices carried through the quiet like broken glass on smooth floor. They laughed, pushed one another, and walked toward the tomb as if it was nothing but a playground. "Look at this old rock," one of them said, kicking the base of the tomb lightly with his shoe. "Who even cares about this anymore?" Another boy joined in with a laugh. "Yeah, it's just stone. Nobody comes here at night. No one will see us." The night grew heavier, and the boys' arrogance climbed higher. Their laughter rang louder than before, echoing against the stone walls of the cemetery grounds. One of them climbed fully onto the tomb now, stamping his feet as if to test the strength of the stone. Another cheered him on while tossing pebbles toward the flowers that had been kicked aside. Their words, sharp with mockery, bounced through the silent air as if daring anyone to stop them. The night air was cool and still as the boys slowly finished their task. The flowers had been returned to the tomb, the flag was standing tall once more, and the ground looked far different from the careless mess they had created. Yet the scratches carved into the stone remained, a silent reminder of what their thoughtlessness had done. They looked at those marks and felt the weight of regret. The guard stood silently, his posture tall, his expression unreadable. He had not raised his hand to them, nor had he shouted. But his quiet authority had been enough to pull them back from arrogance to humility. He let them stand there in silence for a while, letting the moment sink into their hearts. Sometimes silence was the greatest teacher, and he knew that nothing he said now would carry more weight than what they already felt. The boys shuffled uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Their earlier laughter seemed foolish now, as distant as another lifetime. They no longer felt like brave jokers, they felt like children who had touched fire and realized too late how hot it burned. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice low. "We're sorry." The words hung in the air, soft but genuine. The guard gave a small nod. He did not smile, but the sharpness in his eyes softened slightly. "Sorry is not just a word," he replied. "It must be followed by change. If you walk away and return to the same arrogance tomorrow, then your words mean nothing. But if you carry this lesson, then tonight will matter." The boys nodded, their faces serious. The guard turned his gaze back to the tomb. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm but filled with depth. "This place does not belong to me. It does not belong to the authorities who gave me this duty. It belongs to every person who understands sacrifice. It belongs to the families who bring flowers, to the children who ask questions, and to the veterans who salute with tears. It belongs to all who still believe that respect is not weakness but strength." He paused and glanced back at them. "One day, you may stand at another grave. Perhaps it will be someone you love. Perhaps it will be someone who gave their life for you in a way you never expected. And when that day comes, you will remember this night. You will remember that respect is not small, it is everything. The uneasy boy, who had been silent most of the night, finally spoke again. We didn't understand before. But we do now. His voice trembled, but his eyes carried truth. The guard gave a slow nod. Then prove it. Not to me, but to yourselves. Prove it by how you carry yourselves tomorrow, next week, and in every place where respect is demanded. The boys lowered their heads again, the lesson carved into them as deeply as the scratches in the stone. The guard let them go then. He did not call the police, he did not punish them further. He believed that sometimes mercy could teach more than punishment. He had shown them the truth, and now it was their burden to carry. If they chose to forget, it would reveal their weakness. If they chose to change, it would reveal their strength. As they walked away quietly, the guard remained. He stood tall beside the tomb, his eyes scanning the flowers and the flag. He knew the soldier's memory was safe again, at least for tonight. The silence returned, but it was not the empty silence of arrogance. It was the heavy, dignified silence of respect. The wind moved softly through the trees, brushing against the flag, making it flutter slightly as though saluting once more. The guard placed his hand gently on the cold stone of the tomb and whispered under his breath, "Rest easy. You are not forgotten." He thought of his own grandfather, buried far away, and how he never got the chance to stand at his grave. In a way, every soldier's tomb felt like his grandfather's. Protecting them was his way of honoring the man he never truly knew but always respected. The hours passed, and the night grew deeper. The town slept peacefully, unaware of what had happened near the tomb. But the boys who walked home that night carried something heavy in their hearts. They did not speak to one another. They did not laugh. Each one was lost in his own thoughts, replaying the words of the guard, the weight of the silence, and the sight of the flowers they had carelessly destroyed. The boy who had carved his name into the stone kept glancing at his hands, as though the knife still burned in them. He realized no one would ever admire that scratch. It was not a mark of courage but of shame. He wished he could erase it, but he knew he could not. That scar on the tomb would remain, a reminder he would never forget. The boy who had tossed the flag thought of how light it had felt in his hand earlier, and how heavy it had felt when he placed it back with care. For the first time, he understood that a flag was not just cloth. It carried history, sacrifice, and the pride of people who had given everything. The one who had mocked a salute walked with his head down. He felt foolish, remembering how he had stood on the tomb making fun of soldiers. The image haunted him now. He wished he could go back in time and stand differently, straight, respectful, and silent. The uneasy boy, though, felt different. He was thankful that the guard had not only stopped them but also taught them. He knew that without that moment, they would have left laughing, never understanding the weight of their actions. Now he promised himself he would never stand silent again if others mocked something sacred. The guard remained at his post until dawn, the sun slowly painting the sky with colors of gold and blue. As the first rays touched the tomb, the flowers glowed softly in the light. The guard straightened his posture and gave a small salute, honoring the soldier as a new day began. When townspeople came in the morning, they saw the tomb still standing with flowers and a flag. Some noticed the scratches, but none knew the full story behind them. Only the guard and the boys carried that truth. And perhaps, that was enough. Because sometimes, the most important lessons do not come from classrooms or books. They come from mistakes, from silence, and from being confronted by someone who refuses to let honor be forgotten. The boys never returned to mock the tomb again. In fact, months later, some of them came quietly during the day, placing flowers without telling anyone why. They did not want recognition. They only wanted to show respect, to make up for the night they would always remember. And the guard, he continued his duty, watching over the tomb not only with his eyes but with his heart. For him, it was never just about stone. It was about dignity, memory, and the unbroken chain of respect between the living and the dead. That night had begun with arrogance, but it ended with understanding. It began with laughter, but it ended with silence that spoke louder than words. And it reminded everyone, whether they knew it or not, that honor is not something you demand. Honor is something you live. They truly believed they were alone. The silence around the tomb grew deeper after the guard's words. The boys stood frozen, their earlier arrogance gone, replaced by an uneasiness they didn't know how to shake off. The cold night air felt heavier now, pressing on their shoulders as if the soldier's memory itself weighed upon them. The guard's eyes were steady, calm but sharp, like someone who had carried responsibility for many years. He had not raised his voice, he had not threatened them, yet the boys felt smaller than they ever had before. His presence alone carried the power of discipline, and his words carried the truth they could no longer deny. Finally, the guard spoke again, his voice softer this time but still firm. "Do you know who lies here?" he asked, gesturing to the tomb behind him. The boys shook their heads. None of them had ever cared enough to learn. The guard stepped closer, his hand brushing gently against the cold stone of the tomb. "This man," he said slowly, "was once a son, a brother, and a friend. He wore the uniform of his country. When others ran, he stood. When fear called, he pushed it aside. He gave his life not because it was easy, but because it was necessary." The boys listened, their silence thick with guilt. "He died in battle," the guard continued. "He shielded his fellow soldiers from fire, giving them time to escape. He knew the risk, but he chose courage. He did not return home. He never saw his family again. But his sacrifice gave life to others. And that is why this tomb is here, to remind us of what honor looks like." The boys shifted uncomfortably. The boy who had scratched the stone glanced at the marks with regret, as if only now realizing the weight of what he had done. Another looked at the scattered flowers on the ground, his face pale with shame. The guard's gaze did not soften. "You think respect is a small thing? You think it is just about standing quiet in front of stone? Respect is the bridge between the living and the dead. It is how we say, 'We will not forget you.' And when you laughed, when you mocked, you broke that bridge." His words hung heavy, like iron chains that bound their arrogance and pulled it down. One of the boys tried to defend himself weakly. "We didn't mean it like that." The guard turned his eyes on him, not angry, but steady. "Intent does not erase action," he said firmly. "When you disrespect a grave, it does not matter if you meant it or not. What matters is that you did it. And what matters now is what you do next." The boys lowered their heads. They no longer had jokes. They no longer had courage to look him in the eye. The guard took a deep breath, his voice calmer now. "I do not stand here for myself. I stand here for every soldier who gave their life. I stand here for the families who bring flowers and tears. I stand here for the children who come with questions about bravery. And tonight, I stand here to remind you that this place is not empty, it is alive with memory." The uneasy boy at the back finally spoke, his voice trembling. "We didn't think, we didn't realize." The guard looked at him, and for the first time that night, his expression softened slightly. "That is the problem," he said. "Too many people do not think. Too many people do not realize. They treat history as dust, not as blood. They treat sacrifice as a story, not as truth. But tonight, you saw the truth. And now, you must decide, what will you do with it?" The boys stood quietly, their shame growing heavier by the second. The guard's presence, his words, and the silent tomb behind him all pressed against them, leaving no room for excuses. He pointed to the scattered flowers on the ground. "Pick them up," he said simply. For a moment, they hesitated, as if unsure if he truly meant it. But his gaze told them he did. Slowly, one by one, they bent down and began to gather the flowers. Their hands shook slightly, not from fear of the guard, but from the weight of guilt pressing inside them. The guard watched in silence, his arms folded across his chest. He did not move to help them, nor did he speak. He let them feel the act of undoing their damage with their own hands. As they placed the flowers back in front of the tomb, their laughter was replaced by quiet breaths, their careless energy replaced by a heavy stillness. Then the guard pointed to the flag lying crumpled on the ground. "That," he said. The boy who had tossed it picked it up slowly, brushing off the dirt. For the first time that night, he looked at the flag with different eyes. It no longer looked like a toy, it looked like a reminder of something larger than himself. He placed it carefully back in its stand near the tomb, his movements slower and more deliberate than before. The scratches on the stone, however, could not be erased. The boy with the knife stood staring at them, his face pale. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I shouldn't have done that." The guard's voice was steady. "Some marks cannot be undone. But they can be remembered as a lesson. Every time you think of carving your name somewhere, you will think of this night. And maybe, just maybe, you will choose respect instead." The boy nodded slowly, shame tightening his throat. The guard let silence linger again. He knew the lesson was not in his words alone, it was in the weight of the moment, in the actions the boys now carried out with lowered heads. The silence of the tomb, broken earlier by their laughter, now returned with dignity. After a long pause, the guard spoke once more. "Respect is not given because someone demands it. Respect is given because you understand what was lost. Tonight, you stood on the line between arrogance and respect. You mocked, but now you know. And what you do tomorrow, and the next day, will show whether you truly learned." The boys stood quietly, their faces marked with guilt. None of them dared to argue, none of them dared to laugh. The night had changed them in ways they had not expected. The guard's eyes moved slowly across them. "Leave this place with respect," he said finally. "And remember, the dead are never silent. They speak through memory, through honor, through every flower placed and every salute given. You may walk away, but this tomb will remain, and so will the truth it carries." The boys nodded, their arrogance gone. The uneasy boy whispered, "We're sorry." The guard gave a slow nod, his posture still strong. He did not need their apology, but he knew they needed to say it. It was the first step toward understanding. As they turned to leave, the guard remained by the tomb, standing tall. His eyes stayed on the stone, his presence like a shield protecting it. Behind him, the boys walked away quietly, each step heavier than when they had arrived. They no longer laughed, no longer mocked. They had been given a lesson in respect, one they would carry with them long after the night ended. The guard remained still, knowing his duty was not just to protect stone, but to protect memory. And tonight, he had done both. But the guard knew the truth: no one who disrespected this place was ever alone. The eyes of history, of sacrifice, and of memory were always watching. Tonight, those eyes shone through him. His patience had stretched far, but now, it reached its limit. He had seen enough. The moment had come. The guard took a deep, steady breath and stepped forward. His boots pressed against the gravel path with a weight that carried authority. The sound was not loud, but in the stillness of the night, it carried far. The boys froze. Their laughter cut off mid-echo, hanging in the air like broken glass. From the shadows, his tall figure emerged. The dim light of the street lamps caught his shoulders, strong and broad, his posture straight as a soldier's. He walked with purpose, not rushing, not stumbling, but moving forward as if each step belonged to him and to the ground he walked upon. The boys stared, their faces caught between surprise and unease. They hadn't expected anyone to be there. For a moment, none of them spoke, their silence louder than all the noise they had made earlier. The boy standing on the tomb was the first to break. He tried to laugh, though his voice cracked slightly. "Who are you supposed to be?" he asked, though his question carried less courage than he hoped. The guard did not answer immediately. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, letting his tall frame cast a long shadow across the tomb. His dark eyes moved slowly from one boy to the next, studying each face, holding them still with nothing more than his presence. His silence spoke more than words. Finally, his voice came, calm and steady, but firm as stone. "Get down from there." It was not a shout. It was not a plea. It was a command, spoken with quiet authority that allowed no argument. The boy on the tomb hesitated, glancing nervously at his friends. For a second, he thought about ignoring the man, but the weight in the guard's voice pressed down on him. He stepped off, his shoes landing softly on the ground. The guard's eyes stayed sharp. "Do you know where you are standing?" he asked. None of the boys replied. They shifted uneasily, their arrogance slowly draining away under his gaze. "You stand on the grave of a soldier," the guard continued, his voice low but strong. "A man who gave his life so others could live in peace. This place is not stone. It is not just earth. It is honor. It is sacrifice. And you have mocked it." The boys exchanged nervous looks. Their earlier boldness seemed to wither as the truth pressed against them. Still, one of them tried to laugh it off, though the sound was weak. "It's just a tomb. Nobody cares." The guard's eyes locked on him. His silence alone made the boy swallow his words. Then he stepped closer, his shadow falling across the boy's face. "You are wrong," he said. "People care. Families care. Veterans care. And I care." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I care because I know what it means to lose someone in uniform. I care because I know the price of freedom. You stand here tonight mocking a man who gave everything, while you have given nothing." The words hit them like stones. None of them spoke this time. Their eyes flickered toward the damaged flowers, the tossed flag, the scratches on the stone. For the first time that night, shame began to settle on their shoulders. The guard looked at each one of them slowly, holding their gaze. "Do you think bravery is standing in the dark with your friends, breaking what others respect? That is not bravery. That is weakness. True bravery is standing for something when the world is watching, when it costs you something." The uneasy boy at the back shifted uncomfortably. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet the guard's gaze. The guard noticed, but he didn't call him out. He knew silence could sometimes teach more than words. One of the bolder boys tried again, though his voice was softer now. "We were just messing around." The guard's tone hardened. "Messing around? You call scratching a soldier's tomb and tossing away flowers messing around? That man died for people he never met. He died for children he would never see grow. He died for your freedom to walk here tonight. And you dishonor him." The boys looked down, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of his words. The night felt heavier now, not with laughter, but with silence filled with meaning. The guard took a step back, his posture still tall, still commanding. "You think no one is watching. But someone is always watching. History watches. Honor watches. And tonight, I am watching. You should ask yourselves when you walk away from here, what do you want to carry with you? Shame, or respect?" His words lingered in the air like an echo that refused to fade. The boys shifted uneasily, their eyes lowered, their hands restless. They had not expected this. They had expected silence, emptiness, maybe a laugh at their own daring. But instead, they had been met with strength and truth. The guard did not need to shout. He did not need to threaten. His presence alone was enough to silence them, his words sharp enough to cut through their arrogance. The boy with the knife slipped it quietly back into his pocket, no longer eager to leave his mark on the stone. The boy who had tossed the flag glanced toward where it lay on the ground, his face pale with regret. Even the one who had mocked the salute now stood still, his arms hanging awkwardly by his sides, his head lowered. The guard said nothing more. His silence pressed heavier than his words, as if the night itself demanded they think about what they had done. He knew when to speak, and he knew when to let the weight of silence finish the lesson. The boys stood there, unsure, their earlier boldness fully gone. In front of them stood not just a guard, but a man who carried the dignity of the soldier buried behind him. They felt it in the way he stood, in the way he spoke, in the way his presence filled the space. The night that had begun with their laughter had shifted. Now, it belonged to the guard and to the silent soldier's memory. And though none of the boys said it out loud, each of them felt the same truth rising inside them. They had been seen, and they had been judged, not by anger, but by honor. Their arrogance grew as they circled the monument, mocking its stillness. They spoke about carving their names into it, just for fun, to leave a mark where they thought history didn't matter. Their laughter was harsh, echoing through the silent night. The boys grew bolder as the night deepened. At first, it was only laughter and mocking words, but soon their actions became sharper. One of them bent down and pulled at the flowers that had been placed earlier that day. They were still fresh, with bright petals and a soft fragrance, but the boy tossed them aside as if they were trash. Another boy picked up the small flag lying near the base of the tomb and swung it around like a toy sword. He laughed loudly, spinning it in the air before dropping it carelessly onto the ground. Their disrespect seemed endless. They talked loudly, each one trying to sound braver than the other, pushing one another closer to the tomb as if it was some kind of game. "Let's leave our names here," one of them suggested, pulling out a pocket knife. His eyes shone with mischief as he scraped the edge against the stone. The sound was sharp, cutting through the night like a blade against glass. The guard's jaw tightened. He stood in silence, his tall frame steady, but inside, his heart was heavy. He had watched many people come to this place with respect: children placing flowers, families bowing their heads, veterans saluting with tears in their eyes. Every act of kindness toward the tomb felt like a thread weaving the town together. But now, watching these boys scratch their careless names into the stone, he felt the thread breaking. He wanted to shout at them. He wanted to rush forward and stop them immediately. But years of discipline had taught him the value of patience. His role was not just to protect the stone, but also to protect the meaning behind it. If he ran too soon, they might only laugh harder and run away without learning anything. But if he waited, if he chose the right moment, his words and actions might strike them deeper, leaving a lesson that would last longer than fear. The boys kept scratching, their voices filled with arrogance. One of them leaned back and said, "No one even cares about this old place. We're just making it look better." His friends laughed at the joke, their voices echoing against the quiet night. The guard's eyes narrowed as he thought of his own family. His grandfather had been a soldier who never returned from war. His father often told him stories about bravery, sacrifice, and how freedom was built on the shoulders of those who gave their lives. For the guard, the tomb was more than stone. It was a reminder of every sacrifice ever made, a reminder of why respect mattered. Seeing these boys treat it like nothing felt like watching someone tear a page out of history and throw it away. His fists clenched quietly at his sides. He took a slow breath, reminding himself of patience. The night was still young, and he knew they would push further. Sometimes, he thought, people revealed the truth about themselves when they thought no one was watching. And he wanted to see how far they would go before he stepped in. One of the boys climbed onto the edge of the tomb, his shoes scraping against the stone. He raised his arms and mocked a salute, laughing as if he was making fun of soldiers who had given their lives. The others cheered him on, clapping and shouting encouragement. It was a game to them, a moment of entertainment in a place of silence. The guard's chest burned with anger, but he still didn't move. Instead, he studied each of their faces carefully. He wanted to remember them, not only to report later if needed but also to understand the kind of arrogance that could make young men so careless. He noticed how some of them laughed louder than the others, while one boy at the back seemed uneasy, glancing around nervously as though he wasn't fully comfortable with what they were doing. The uneasy boy caught the guard's attention. He was younger than the rest, maybe pulled into this group just to feel included. His laughter was weak, his eyes shifting toward the tomb with hesitation. The guard noticed this because he understood something important. Sometimes disrespect was born from arrogance, but sometimes it was born from weakness, from the need to belong. Still, the majority of them were bold. The boy with the knife continued scratching into the stone, his hand pressing harder as if to prove something. Another boy kicked the flowers again, scattering petals across the ground. The boy who mocked the salute stood tall on the edge of the tomb, shouting into the night like it was his stage. The guard breathed slowly. His anger was deep, but his patience was stronger. He thought about the town, about the people who trusted him to keep the place safe. He thought about the silent mornings when old veterans came and stood in front of the tomb with trembling salutes. He thought about the children who placed small flowers, whispering prayers they barely understood. All those people respected this place. And now, watching the boys, he felt as though he was standing between the memory of honor and the face of arrogance. He knew the moment to act was coming soon. The boys were growing wilder, louder, and more careless. Their arrogance was like a flame rising higher, and flames, if left unchecked, could burn everything around them. The guard understood that if he didn't step in soon, they would damage the tomb in ways that could not be undone. But he also understood something deeper. His role was not just to stop them. His role was to teach them. Fear might stop them for one night, but respect could stop them for a lifetime. And respect could only be taught when the right moment arrived. So he stayed still in the shadows, watching them, his tall figure blending into the night. His eyes stayed sharp, his patience steady, his heart ready. Every step they took, every careless act, was leading them closer to the moment when he would reveal himself. And when that moment came, they would not just see a guard, they would see the weight of history standing before them. The night was quiet except for their laughter, but under that laughter, something heavier was building. The guard could feel it, like a storm waiting behind clouds. The boys thought they were free to do as they pleased, but they were wrong. They were being watched by a man who understood sacrifice, honor, and memory far better than they ever could. And soon, they would understand it too. But what they didn't know was that someone was watching. Just a few steps away, hidden in the quiet darkness, stood the guard. A tall black man in his 40s, strong from years of discipline, with eyes that had seen both hardship and respect. He was not just any guard, he had been chosen by the local heritage authorities because of his dedication. For him, this duty was not just a job, it was personal. Every evening, he walked the grounds, checking that nothing was out of place. He had seen children come with flowers, mothers kneel with tears, and old veterans salute with trembling hands. To him, the tomb was alive with meaning. It was not a cold stone, it was a story carved in silence. Now, as he stood in the shadows, he saw the boys mock it. His heart tightened. He felt anger rising, but he held it back. Years of training had taught him patience. He clenched his fists quietly, his eyes fixed on their movements. He didn't move yet, because he believed in choosing the right moment. His silence was not weakness, it was strength waiting to act. The guard's thoughts drifted to his own grandfather, a man who had fought in wars long ago. His grandfather's grave was far away, but whenever the guard stood near this tomb, he thought of him. He thought of the pain, the courage, the long nights of sacrifice. And now, watching these boys laugh, he felt the sting of disrespect not only for the soldier buried here but for every soldier who had ever given their life. The boys continued their noise, kicking away the flowers that had been placed by kind hands just that morning. One even picked up a small flag and tossed it carelessly aside. The guard's chest burned with frustration. He thought of the people who would come tomorrow morning to find the place in ruins. He thought of the disappointment on the faces of the veterans who always trusted him to keep the tomb safe. He stayed silent, but inside, his spirit was roaring. The boys were too blind to notice the tall figure standing not far from them. Their arrogance was louder than their caution. They laughed at the silence of the tomb, believing it meant no one cared. But the guard cared. He cared more deeply than they could ever imagine. Every mark, every flower, every stone carried weight for him. He could not allow this sacred place to be dishonored. He adjusted his posture, still waiting, still watching. He wanted them to reveal how far they would go. He wanted to see their true nature before stepping in. He knew that sometimes, words spoken too early could be ignored, but words spoken at the right moment could strike the heart. As the boys circled the tomb, unaware of the eyes on them, the night seemed to hold its breath. The lamps flickered, the wind moved lightly through the trees, and the guard stood tall in the shadows, silent but ready. He was more than a watchman, he was a protector of memory. And though the boys thought they were alone in their mockery, they were not. Every step, every careless laugh, every act of disrespect was being witnessed by a man who understood the true meaning of honor. The guard's patience was not weakness. It was strength sharpened by discipline. He would step forward when the time was right. He would make them understand what they were mocking. But for now, he stood steady, like the tomb itself, a figure carved out of silence and strength, watching the scene unfold. The night had just begun, but the guard knew it would not end the way the bullies imagined.